That's normal.
That's normal.
All right. Call to order the December meeting of the local planning agency. Can I have a roll call, please?
Steve Coates.
Ton Win.
Jim McPherson.
Melissa Ozemic.
Jamie Seifert.
Janet Wilson.
And we stand for pledge allegiance.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
And could I have a motion to approve the agenda?
Motion to approve.
Second.
And could I have a vote, please? Motion carries 6-0. And could I have a motion to approve the minutes of the November meeting?
Motion to approve the minutes.
Second.
And everybody please vote. All right, and do we have any public comments not related to something that is on the agenda this evening? Nothing heard. Thank you.
Okay, we're at the first quasi-judicial hearing. It's ordinance number 2171, an ordinance of the City Council of the City of Fort Walton Beach, Florida, amending the city's comprehensive plan to amend the future land use map for 627 Country Club Drive, or Country Club Avenue Northeast to low density residential, providing for authority, providing for findings of fact, providing for consistency, providing for severability, and providing for an effective date. And this is, once again, is a quasi-legislative hearing, and Mr. Gibson will present on behalf of staff.
So good evening, Tim Gibson, Planning Supervisor for the City of Fort Walton Beach. The next two ordinances will be combined. There's actually a total of 3 ordinances for this one, and a new annexation into the city. However, the annexation ordinance doesn't actually come through the LPA, it will just go straight to City Council. So the two before you tonight is going to be the future land use map amendment and the zoning. First up, which is the future land use map. So on October 28, 2024, the Growth Management Department received a voluntary annexation application for 627 Country Club Avenue Northeast to annex into the city limits. We did, as always, when an annexation occurs, they have a county future land use and a county zoning. We have to assign it a city one, which is what these ordinances will do here. For this one, the property size is approximately 0.34 acres, and it does have a current Okaloosa County future land use designation of low density residential and a zoning designation of residential 1, R1. This is out similar to the annexation we did a couple months ago. It is completely surrounded by city properties. It is, they are all zoned R1, single family residential with a low density residential future land use. With the exception on this one, the properties to the west of it is the city golf course, which has a recreation future land use on there. The proposed city of Fort Walton Beach low density residential land use category would allow for the R1 zoning that is also proposed there. And with that, staff finding the fact is that the LDR is compatible with the surrounding area. The proposed future land use designation of LDR is consistent with the city's comprehensive plan and land development code. And it just has followed all of the requirements of section 163.318 for the statutes. And with that, staff respectfully recommend local planning agency approval to recommend city council adoption of ordinance number 2171 to amend the city's future land use map to designate the future land use for 627 Country Club Avenue Northeast as low density residential.
Any questions? Would anybody to speak? Anybody else? No questions? I have a motion.
Motion to recommend approval of ordinance 2171, ordinance to amend the future land use map for 627 Country Club Avenue.
Second.
And everybody please vote. Motion carries 6-0.
Okay, the next ordinance is ordinance number 2172, an ordinance of the City Council of the City of Fort Walton Beach, Florida, providing for authority, providing for findings of fact, providing for property described as 627 Country Club Avenue Northeast, more particularly describing the body of the ordinance to be zoned R1, single-family residential zoning district, providing for the amendment of the effective portion of the official zoning map, providing for severability, and providing for an effective date. Again, this is a quasi-legislative hearing. Mr. Gibson's presenting on behalf of staff.
Like I said, this is the third step in the annexation, the second one tonight. Again, this is 627 Country Club Avenue Northeast. It does currently have the zoning designation, Okaloosa County zoning designation of residential 1, R1. The existing land use right now, it was a vacant lot, but it has been under construction for single-family residence through Okaloosa County permitting. I believe that is very close to being completed as well. For this one, section 2.1.5, the city's land development code outlines the criteria to be used in determination of the appropriate zoning district. The first of those is whether the requested zoning district is consistent with the future land use category according to table 2.1.5, and the R1 is consistent with the LDR that was just recommended. Next is if this was compatible with the uses in adjacent zoning districts, and as I said previously, this is surrounded by R1 zoning districts with the exception of the golf course to the west of it. Next is whether the requested use is substantially more intense or less intense than allowed development on adjacent parcels. And again, as they will all be R1, they will be similar intensity. Next is if it's a requested use is based on soil types, topographies, protection of natural resources, and protection of designated historic areas. And a review of this one indicates that there's no wetlands, archaeologically sensitive areas, or anything here. So this would all just be handled through the permit process. Typically, as I said, this one's a little bit unusual. It was permitted through Okaloosa County, but is now being annexed in for utility purposes. And with that, staff does find that the proposed zoning is consistent with the proposed future land use, that it is compatible with the uses in adjacent zoning districts, and it is not substantially more or less intense than the allowable development on adjacent properties. And with that, staff respectfully recommends local planning agency approval to recommend city council adoption of ordinance number 2172 to designate the zoning for 627 Country Club Avenue Northeast as single-family residential R1.
Yeah, I just have one question. You said the permitting was done through the county.
That's correct.
Does it meet all of our setbacks for the city?
It does. Well, we did review that. I mean, obviously, with the permitting going through there, it would be done to their standards.
Okay.
This one did work out, though, that it does meet all of our required setbacks, impervious, everything. So it will be
Okay.
completely in compliance with our code.
Perfect.
Are ours different than the county?
They are. I mean, everywhere is going to be different as far as like some of their setback differences and some stuff like that. I don't know all of the county ones off the top of my head. I do know there are several differences, though.
All right. Thank you. Anybody? Any more questions?
I'll make a motion to recommend city council adoption of ordinance number 2172 to assign the R1 zoning designation to property located at 627 Country Club Avenue.
A second.
And before we all vote, can you just technically ask for any public comment?
Oh, yeah, we have any public comments on this one? 627. Nothing heard. It carries 6-0. Moving on.
Okay, the next ordinance is ordinance number 2173, an ordinance of the City Council of the City of Fort Walton Beach, Florida, amending the city's comprehensive plan to amend the future land use map for property described as 245 Brook Street Southeast, more particularly describing the body of the ordinance from LDR, low density residential, to MDR, medium density residential, providing for authority, providing for findings of fact, providing for consistency, providing for severability, and providing for an effective date. And this is a quasi-legislative hearing, and Mr. Gibson is here on behalf of the staff.
Good evening again. Hi. For this one, in September 2024, city staff discussed the development of the property located at 245 Brook Street Southeast with the property owners. They indicated their desire to build 3 single-family homes on the property if it is able to be rezoned into the R2 zoning district. And that will require them to complete a subdivision plat that will end up going back through city council to divide it into the 3 pieces, but that would be done at a later date as long as it can get rezoned. We did discuss the differences in the development standards for R1 versus R2, and ultimately that's really what kind of drove this is, so in your R2 zoning districts, they have a little bit smaller setbacks in the rear. It's 20 instead of 25 feet. but also it has different minimum lot sizes and lot widths, which allows us to be kind of cut up into those three pieces to build the single-family homes on there. The minimum lot size for an R2 zone property is 5,000 square feet versus 7,200 square feet for the R1 zone property. So that would allow them to have a little bit more flexibility on the property there to do that. On October 3rd, 2024, Growth Management Department received the application to amend the future land use map from low-density residential to medium-density residential. And it also included the proposed rezoning that will be the next ordinance on this one. So for this one, the total site size is approximately 0.56 acres. It currently has a future land use designation of low-density residential. And the proposed future land use would be medium-density residential, MDR. Like I said, it is currently zoned R1, but it is proposed to go to the R2 to be consistent with the future land use on that one. This one does sit kind of uniquely where it does have some R2 and some MDR zoning to the south of it and some R2 zoning to the north of it. But there's also some R1 zoning and low-density residential future land uses around it. City staff did look at this and did feel that since it can still be contiguous with some of the other compatible zonings in the area, that this would be acceptable. This is consistent with the city's comprehensive plan and land development code. And the staff does find that the process for the adoption of the future land use map amendment has followed all the requirements of section 163.3187 of the Florida statutes. And with that, staff respectfully recommends local planning agency approval to recommend city council adoption of ordinance number 2173 to amend the city's future land use map for the designation at 245 Brook Street Southeast from low density residential LDR to medium density residential MDR.
Okay, I've got a question. When I looked it up, it says minimum 50-foot width. For R2 versus R1 is a 75-foot width.
That's correct.
What's the purpose of the 75? Because basically it says you can get 6 dwelling units on an acre, and this is over half an acre. So if it weren't for that 75, they would probably already be able to get 3 on that property. Is that not correct?
It'd probably be a problem with this one. I don't know the exact math off the top of my head, but the 7,200 square foot is going to be an issue in there as well. So when you're dealing with just that certain amount in there, so the 7,200 square foot comes from the square footage of 1 acre. If you divided that in 6, you're going to end up with 7,200 square foot. So that's where that density of 6 comes into an acre
Right.
on there. But that's where with this property, with the overall sizes of the different lots and
Wasn't this one
the
over half
widths.
an acre?
I'm sorry?
Was this one over half an acre or no?
It's 0.56 acres.
This
Okay.
was also on a corner,
Yeah, I did see
so it's
that.
gonna,
It's a combination of all of it, though, getting the 7,200 square foot to fit in a normal place that could be developed. You can get to a lot of places, but not actually have it be to where it's gonna make sense for that 7,200 square foot to add up, if
Okay.
that makes sense.
I think my only concern is then they can build up to 20 units on that, or 10 units on that property.
That's it, with the density of 20, they could theoretically, yes. So the proposal is for the 3 single-family homes, but that's a good
But we're
point.
not
that-
approving it
That
for 3.
realistically, it could be, plans change and they end up doing something more like an apartment complex and stuff on there.
Okay.
We're not as concerned about that one though, because for a couple reasons. One, the site is pretty small, so you would have a very difficult time with parking, stormwater retention, impervious and all those things to do any kind of developments in there. In addition to that, there is height compatibility standards listed in Chapter 4 of our Land Development Code that basically says if it's adjacent to single-family residential homes, the building can only be 1.5 times the average height of the single-family residentials. So you couldn't go in there and put like a 5-6 story apartment complex on there. It just would not be considered compatible with the single-family
Right.
homes next to it.
but you have the condos right across the street.
They're on the
When it's
water.
across the street, that's not considered, the rule is within 100 feet. And so typically when you've got setbacks and the street widths and everything, that's gonna be well over the 100 foot, so.
Okay,
All right, thank
that's
you.
all I have.
Anybody wanna speak on 245, public comments?
Jeff, do they need to be sworn in?
No, it's quasi-legislative, so
Good evening, everybody.
Many of you know me and many of you don't. My name is Gavin Wolf. I'm one of the family members considered a partner in Tracy Acre Construction. I'm joined by my mother-in-law, Johnette Acre, here tonight. And this one's a little bit different for us. Y'all see us pretty often, but we've got the city's support, and Tim and I are on the same side of the aisle, so that's different. So we recently purchased 245 Brook Street, and when I was looking at it, I kind of decided that I would have the room, potentially to do 3 single-family homes, but the lot width was the main thing that was a concern, and so I approached him before we even purchased the property and asked how the city would feel about this, and they said that they would support me in this matter. So Ms. Wilson, you brought up a good point where if they did change it to R2, or if y'all propose to change it to R2, where we would have some flexibility as far as the density and things, but I'm not a big fan of building apartment buildings in the first place, and like Tim said, we would be pretty restricted due to stormwater, drainage, parking, and then the height of the surrounding area. So this is my little proposed plot plan that my surveyor came up with. We'll have 2 50-foot wide lots that would front Brooks, and then this other one ends up being whatever it is. We didn't spend too much time on it, just not, so it didn't waste any resources, depending, how y'all felt. But so yeah, we want to do 3 single-family homes. We live in the neighborhood. We build a lot of homes in Elliott's Point. It would be kind of cohesive with the rest of the things that we've done there, and cohesive with the rest of the neighborhood. So yeah, that's pretty much it. This one's kind of cut and dry. So.
Thank you.
Okay, any questions at all? Thank you all.
Do I have a motion?
I motion to approve 2173 ordinance to amend the flume for 245 Brook Street Southeast.
Second.
And we vote. Motion carries 6-0.
Okay, the next ordinance is ordinance number 2174, an ordinance of the City Council of the City of Fort Walton Beach, Florida, providing for authority, providing for findings of fact, providing for property described as 245 Brook Street Southeast, more particularly described in the body of the ordinance to be rezoned R2 multifamily residential zoning district, providing for the amendment of the effective portion of the official zoning map, provide for severability, and provide for an effective date. And this is a quasi-legislative hearing, and Mr. Tim Gibson is presenting on behalf of staff.
So this is the phase 2 of this one here, so I'm not going to go over the background unless you have more questions on it. For this one, again, section 2.1.5 of the Land Development Code outlines the criteria for the zoning. First is whether or not the requested zoning district is consistent with the future land use category, and as we're going to recommend for the MDR, the R2 zoning district would be appropriate in there. Next is whether or not it would be compatible with uses in adjacent zoning districts, and as I said, there's a mix of R1 and R2 in the area. R2 obviously is a little more intense than the R1 zoning districts, but given the fact that there's already several other R2 zone properties in the area, we did not feel this would be incompatible there. Next would be whether the requested use is substantially more intense or less intense than the allowable development on the adjacent properties, and again, it's the same there. And then again, that one that's based on the soil type, topography, protection of natural resources, and protection of designated historic areas. With this one, this is located within an archaeologically sensitive area, but the site has been developed previously, so typically with that one, the state doesn't really get too in-depth in there. There is an extra step that we'll have to go through to run this through the state basically to see if there is any indication of any artifacts or anything ever discovered in that area. But again, that would be done through all of the permit processing and everything in the future with this, that would come later on. And with that one, staff does find that the proposed zoning district is consistent with the existing future land use category, that the uses within the requested zoning district are compatible with the uses in the adjacent zoning district, and that it is not substantially more or less intense. And with that, staff respectfully recommend local planning agency approval to recommend City Council adoption of ordinance number 2174 to rezone 245 Brook Street Southeast from single-family residential R1 to multifamily residential R2 zoning district.
Thank you. Any questions? I think so. Anybody? Public comments? And a motion?
Motion to move 2174 ordinance to rezone 245 Brook Street Southeast from R1 to R2.
Second.
All right, motion carries 6-0.
The next ordinance is ordinance number 2159, an ordinance of the City Council of the City of Fort Walton Beach, Florida, amending Chapter 5 of the Land Development Code related to livery vessels, providing for findings of fact, regulating livery vessels, modifying the definition of livery vessels, requiring for permitting and a formal application process for livery vessels, providing for severability and providing for an effective date. This is a quasi-legislative hearing, and Mr. Tim Gibson's presenting the ordinance on behalf of staff.
Hi, good evening again. Last one here. So this one's a little bit of an unusual one. What y'all are typical to seeing is when we have like land development code changes, the first step in that process is it comes to the LPA. You guys get to give your input on it. It then goes to City Council for a first reading and then on to a second reading from there unless there's major changes needed. But with this one, just with the timing of it, it actually went to City Council last month on the 19th for their first hearing on it, which is still valid and able to do. We can't do the second reading until the LPA has heard this and had your input on this one. This one here is a fairly drastic change to our LDC as far as the livery vessels operations are in here. City Council did have a very long discussion on this one. They did specifically point out that they did want this to make sure that we did bring it back to the LPA because they did want to hear some of y'all's input on some specific items really, but I mean really on anything in the ordinance. So with this one, this goes back to August 24th, 2021, when City Council first adopted the Land Development Code changes to provide some guidance for livery vessel operations. And when they did that, they gave a 2-year compliance period. On August 24th, 2023, after that 2-year period, there were very few vendors that were in compliance. Staff did kind of talk about it at that point, being that that was in the fall. There's not really that many operations going on. Staff decided we would wait until the springtime when they were starting to operate again to kind of start reaching out and trying to get everyone into compliance at that point. However, on January 23rd, 2024, Ordinance 2135 was presented to City Council to enact a temporary moratorium on issuance of permits or business tax receipts for livery vessel operators to any business that was not with a valid business tax receipt and 100% compliant with the code at that time. So what that would have done is basically stop anyone from coming into compliance, whether they had a DTR or not. That did get shut down at City Council level, and basically they said, you know, they directed staff to work with the operators, try to get people into compliance, but there was also some directed changes that needed to be made to the Land Development Code language at that time. We have been working with the operators this year. We've got many, many more of them in compliance with the code as it is right now, which is a good thing. With this one, the changes that have been made in here starts off with we've updated the definitions pertaining to livery vessels. Specifically around that one was the term bareboat charter. Really has some different definitions, so we really kind of wanted to narrow that down and show what that was specifically as it pertains to our LDC. Next was to provide some guidance for livery vessel operators operating as secondary use on a property. Say there's a principal use and then this is just going to be something else done on the property. Next is basically that the city manager or designee, that would be our department, would issue a certificate of compliance upon completion of the application requirements. We've been kind of informally doing that already. I'll email people saying, hey, yep, you are 100% in compliance. Cool, we're all good to go. This will just basically be more of a formal issuance of compliance at that point. Next would be to establish the permits are non-transferable or assignable. And what they mean by that, they really, some of the hard part about this is the boats. You know, obviously they're very mobile. You know, so if they're set up and everything meets code requirements for them to be at this location, well, if that boat moves, you know, half a mile down the road, it may not be in compliance there anymore for several other items that are in there. So that's what they wanted with that non-transferable in there. Next, it added an expiration date for permits to be the last day of February, and that the renewal period should be between November 1st and March 1st of every year. And so the intent behind the renewable permit on this one, so the business tax receipt is simply it's a receipt that says you've paid your business tax. It is not regulatory per the state. We can't really hold up a business tax receipt for anything or say we're not going to reissue this because you're not in compliance with stuff. So we needed to have another way to ensure compliance with these things. And that's one of the things that we've seen in several of the other jurisdictions in the area have gone to an annual registration process, basically. So that way we can get these in every year, because the way the code's written right now is once you're compliant. You know, if you get 10 more boats, we may not really be compliant anymore, but we're not gonna have any way to know that you got 10 more boats. And the new boats you got, do they have the right markings on them? There's really no way to kind of track the changes that are going on, or if you move locations. There really wasn't a good way to track that. So we kind of piggybacked off of what some of the other jurisdictions in the state have been doing. And that's where we came up with this like annual registration process to where essentially you'll come in, you'll certify, I had X number of boats, and then we'll issue, as long as everything else meets the code requirements, we'll issue essentially like a sticker to go on the boat that says, yes, this boat is in compliance with the code. And so theoretically then, if more boats are added later on, they'd have to come back and get, you know, kind of verify that they're still in compliance with the code at that point. And that's what the next section there for the issue of the decals. And then we did update some of the supplemental rules for delivery operations and establish some enforcement options in there. When this did go to City Council, there was one provision in here regarding a parking agreement and shared parking. It was written in that that would not be allowed for livery vessel operators. However, that was discussed at City Council. And essentially they directed that that be removed, so that it's still in the copy that you received there, just because I wanted you guys to have the whole thing, but that has been directed to be removed by City Council. Essentially it's going to follow the same rules as everybody else, that we allow parking agreements for any businesses if they go through the formal process of a parking agreement, and that's going to be allowed for the livery vessel operators as well in this one. Some of the specific changes that they did ask for, or specifically wanted the input from you guys on, there's one is on fuel can prohibition for the fueling. It's kind of gone back and forth on that one, whether that's the right thing to do. The portable fuel cans, it's up, so some of the feel like it might be going now is instead of prohibiting the fuel cans, because there are also like fuel caddies, where the cans, you know, they're on like almost like a wagon, and they have the hose just like a fuel pump would. Maybe allowing those versus not just the cans that you carry around out there. But again, that's something that I'd love to get your input on and pass along to City Council for. There is an issue that came up. Okay, so after the first reading, we did hear from some livery vessel operators with some concerns over some of the language that was in here as well. One of those was just, I think it kind of got lost in translation over several iterations of making these changes. So there's a requirement in here for buffering. The intent behind that one was basically for your single family dwellings and your hotels and transient lodging, that the livery vessel should be buffered through some sort of screening. The problem with that was we do have some locations where you have like a hotel on the same property where you're operating livery vessels. How do you screen between the same things on the same property? And obviously the property owners are okay with them being there since they're both allowing them to operate on that property. So the intent was to basically take it and say that it would need to be buffered against those uses on adjacent properties. But the language that got written in here basically says that you have to separate from on the same property, and you have to separate from any adjacent property. And that really wasn't the intent we had going into this one, so that's going to be one that we're going to recommend back to City Council, that we just change that to have the buffering against those uses on adjacent properties and not on the same property on there. There was a discussion, there really wasn't a lot of guidance given on this one, so with the decal process and stuff, And I'll be the first to say I'm not an expert on liveries. I learn more about these every day. But say you have a fleet of 10 livery vessels that you're going to rent out, and you have 1 or 2 of them go out for maintenance purposes. I guess it's common to have several other ones that you can put in their place. So the questions come up on how did that handle. So if you register and you show that you've got all the requirements for your 10 livery vessels and you get your 10 stickers, when you take 2 of those out of the water, you put your 2 replacements in there that don't have stickers, how do we handle that? That's something that we're gonna have to come up with a process for dealing with that one. Whether it's a simple phone call that's made or if we issue X number of stickers per other ones for those chase boat type things in there. That one really hasn't been decided yet which direction that one wants to go on for that one. And then the only other thing that got brought up is that it really, like I said, it gives the annual renewal process and stuff, but what it doesn't do is give a process in there. So what happens if in June or July, a new business comes in or an existing business gets more boats? There's no process for changing it after that initial registration period early in the year in there. So we're gonna have to build in some language for that one. That's what was presented to City Council. Again, bounce back to you guys. For your recommendation or kind of any comments on any of the material in here. And I did make sure, and there's a lot of livery operators in here now, we make sure to get this out to them that this was going to be happening tonight, just to get them here too, so I'm sure they've got input as well.
Okay, so how are we gonna enforce it?
So part of the goal, well, I mean, we do have code enforcement that could theoretically get involved in this, but a lot of times what we're believing is going to happen, and what happened when we initially went into this, it was kind of self-enforced. You know, the companies that are playing by the rules and they're doing the right thing, that are doing the registration, they've got their parking, they've got their stuff, they're doing all their safety, they're posting all their stuff right. They don't want these rogue operators out there any more than we do in the city. So a lot of it, I think, is going to be a lot self-regulated. We have had people in the past tell us about some rogue operators operating out of places. We've had in the past some people operating out of the city parks, which is not allowed. We find out about it. People are happy to inform us that these are happening, and then we can deal with those as they go into compliance.
So I'll describe a scenario where there's a canal here in Fort Walton Beach, and if they want to keep the boats behind their houses, how are you going to enforce it?
So that becomes that's a little bit of a different situation there, in that you're talking about residential
Absolutely.
uses out there. There are some. I would probably more defer to our city attorney on that one. Ms. Kopp has been working with our code enforcement people on a couple of specific residential properties that are doing just that. They have 6, 7 pontoon boats in their backyard that they're renting out. You know, it's a little bit different. You know, if you got your house and you got one pontoon boat and you want to loan it to a friend or something, we're running into those though where we have seen a couple of properties that have multiple. And again, Ms. Kopp is kind of going down that road on that one. Again, we find out about them. Some of the problem with that is getting proof of those operations. Because, I mean, it's all happening behind fences, behind doors.
Is there currently
We can't
any?
really see a lot of that stuff.
Excuse
Fish
me.
and wildlife, and
Well, we did actually, one of these came up in front of code enforcement a couple months ago, and it got shut down. So it's an issue that they're aware of, and staff's going to be working on it more over the off-season to sort of improve their internal processes on the code enforcement aspect.
That's all I'm wondering, how is it actually enforced? When it's in
The
somebody's
first
backyard.
test case came up a few months back, and it wasn't on the canal I know you're talking about. It was actually on a finger of Cinco Bayou. Along Beale, and they shut that business down from operating at that location behind the house effectively. So
How do you shut it down?
through fines, they basically they stopped operating after they were going to get fined.
Okay.
Now, not all operators will react like that operator did, and so the situation you're talking about is a unique situation that we could maybe talk more off the record on if you want, but they're going to be pursuing that case differently next year because there's 2 properties involved in that one.
Yes, sir.
I don't want to play devil's advocate here, but wasn't there a thing about we couldn't do anything about home-based businesses? Wouldn't that be considered a home-based business if you did it out of your backyard?
So Again, that gets into a fine line, because one of the criteria in sort of statutes for home-based businesses, it cannot change the general appearance or use of the property from a residential property. So when you're renting 5 boats and you've got 20 cars parked in your front yard, that you're changing the appearance and intent of a residential property. Florida's home-based business ones are basically to allow that small, non-impactful, your neighbors are probably not even gonna know anything's going on there. So when the neighbors know what's going on there, you've kind of gone outside of the realm of that home-based business protection under Florida statute.
Well, additionally too, you have to get submerged land lease, a commercial submerged land lease to operate a livery business out of a residential zone area anyway. And I know there's people here who've gone through that process. They'll tell you that's a very valuable asset that the DEP wants to hand those out. And so they can't get one of those at a residential business. So that's why a livery will always stick out like a sore thumb.
Which leads me to another question. Is there a maximum number of boats that someone can claim to have on their property in the land development code? Can I say, okay, those 3 boats are mine?
Which ones are personal boats? I don't remember.
I think actually somehow y'all knew off the top of your head, and I never looked further on this, that two boats.
I think that's what.
2 boats in that situation, that particular business ended up storing 2 boats on their property and like as dry storage and removed the rest of the boats from the water.
Okay, gotcha.
So I just have a question. So what's a livery vessel?
So for all, the pontoon boats that get rented is your typical livery vessel.
Okay.
So it's essentially a boat or a vessel that is rented out.
Could it be
to
jet
somebody.
skis?
Jet skis are
Stuff like that?
considered
Okay.
as well. Yeah.
I was like, I'm reading out this, I'm like, I don't know what a livery vessel is.
Florida statute does define it pretty decently, and I think we've got it somewhat in here, where we just reference back to Florida statute, because it does, because I mean, it does exempt other things, you know, from paddle boards and stuff, you know, that's not a livery vessel, you can rent a paddle board out without.
So my question is this different than what Destin is doing?
It is different, it is similar,
So
but it
it's
is
working
different.
for Destin, right?
What's that?
It's working for Destin, the way that they register their boats and their businesses.
It's the same as they're doing right there, as
So
far
are
as the
we
annual
trying to-
registration and all that kind
Are
of
we
stuff.
trying to follow what they're doing?
We're trying to get all on board with this across the whole county, honestly. So the county has a code enforcement officer that does nothing but liveries. That is their primary job, is just code enforcement of liveries. They're the ones that put on like the county safety programs every year and some things like that. They've really been working with a lot of these other ones. They're even working with some of the municipalities who don't have actual livery vessel language in their code. For example, I don't know if this is still the case, but Mary Esther did not have any language in there. So basically, they were going to kind of pull them under their umbrella of code enforcement for the city of Mary Esther as well, for any livery operator. So we're trying to get it to where it's a similar playing field. I mean, obviously, there's going to be a little bit of differences in there because the Destin City Council might see something a little bit differently than our city council sees and stuff. But we're trying to get it to where it is fairly compatible. We don't want to put some ridiculous strain on a user here that they're not having in Destin, and we also don't want to make it, you know, the same thing either way. We want it to where it's fairly consistent, but again, it is each municipality or the county that's going to determine what those rules are.
And Tim, building on that, a big difference, and I think Fort Walton Beach City Council about a year ago indicated that they were not interested in following Destin's example on one thing. Destin set up a system where they kind of have de facto medallions that, like they have a finite amount of livery vessels that are actually allowed in the city, and they keep extending this moratorium indefinitely, and they don't say indefinitely, but it's kind of indefinitely. And what that's done is it's created only a certain number of livery vessels, and livery vessel businesses actually can't operate in total in the city, and I think they actually sell them in between some of the businesses. And so that's not something Fort Walton Beach seemed interested in about a year ago, and I don't think they didn't revisit this last time, did they?
No, I don't believe there's any appetite for that. The registration process is very similar to what Destin does at the annual registration, but the medallions is not something that
That leads
I'm
to a
not
lot
aware
of-
that anyways, that we're going that
That
route.
leads to a lot of industry regulation though too, because you know, people own those medallions, they're valuable, so they'll rat on the other businesses that don't have the medallions. So,
One of the questions I have is, you talked about if somebody's got the decals, say for 10 boats, and they take 2 of them out, what do they do about replacing those 2? Well, in any other type of rental business, I mean, why can't they come in and get 2 more decals?
And that's what we're trying to figure out, what the right thing is. Honestly, that's probably gonna be a matter of just working between some of the operators and staff to get something back to city council on that one. Whether it's a matter of, you know, you come in and you get the other stickers, or if it's a matter of for every, 5 livery vessels you have, you get 6 stickers, so that way you have 1 extra for that chase boat or something. I don't know what the final solution's gonna be on that one. That's one of the things we've gotta answer.
Suggest maybe like a different colored one for your standby
That's
ones or
possible.
something like that.
Some places do it to where it's just simply a matter of, hey, I'm pulling boat number 1, 2, 3, 4 out of the water, and I'm gonna put boat 6, 7, 8, 9 in the water in its place. It doesn't have a sticker, but just for the next 2 weeks, that's what's gonna be operating. So I don't know if that's the route we wanna go with. That's probably the simplest one,
So
but it's
what-
also probably the most manually labor-intensive one, trying to track all that.
So what would be the reason for not getting decals for all the boats? I mean, they've all got to be registered. Why not have decals for all of them, whether they're in the water or not in the water?
I mean, and that's where it's gonna come, because, I mean, part of the requirements for this is they have to have chase boats as well, so they have to have boats that they don't rent out, that they will be able to take and go, get, like if another boat breaks down or some things like that. Or for just this exact thing, they may wanna have, where if they've got, reservations for their 10 boats for every day for the next 2 months, well, if 2 go down, well, I gotta have replacements for them. And stuff, so it's really just a matter of that. I mean, and some of it's gonna be restrictive over how many slips do you have and stuff like that. So you may have some other boats in dry storage somewhere else that you can go and put in there, when you pull them out, that you wouldn't necessarily need to have stickers for, because they're just gonna be in dry storage.
Gotcha.
Because what's gonna be driven on the annual registration is if you have those 10 boats, well now then, what's the parking requirements for those 10 boats? What's all these different things for those 10 boats that we're gonna be gauging off of 10 boats, not 12, 14, 16, however many you
Okay.
have, but for those 10.
As soon as you tied it to parking, it makes sense.
Okay.
And building on that, because I wrote that's livery ordinance back in 16, one issue that they had was there were some businesses that had a certain amount of livery vessels they were permitted for, and what they would do, they'd rent them all out in the morning, and then they launch a bunch of them at the boat launch, and then refill up their docks behind it, and so they would keep doubling up basically rent out 3 times the amount of boats that they actually were permitted for
Gotcha.
from the parking, and so that's where the whole concept of decals came up, and so
Okay.
I guess to answer your question, why not just be allowed to throw decals on all the boats?
Well, that
Playing
makes
devil's
sense.
advocate, that would maybe be why you don't just hand them out for all the
Right.
boats.
No, that makes more sense now. Sir.
Is there,
And this is brainstorming too, because I think,
Yeah,
we can do that.
Any solutions that
Yeah.
you wanted to give back to city council on these things,
So
like I said, the
what
only
was
one that
the
really
determination
dominated-
on the parking?
I'm sorry?
That you mentioned in here, what was the determination on the parking?
That was on first reading, they directed that section be removed.
So
And that
no
section,
requirement.
not the parking standards, the parking standards is a separate section, that's in chapter 6 of the land development code. What was written in here was the language that, it said each livery vessel operator and other businesses within the city is required to meet the city's applicable requirements for parking, which is just a fact, that doesn't need to be stated in there. Shared parking agreements between businesses are prohibited, except that any business established that has lawful shared parking agreement in place and was otherwise operating lawfully in the city prior to April 1st, 2024, may continue such shared parking agreements until such time as the businesses cease to operate. That's what's coming out of there, because shared parking agreements are something we allow between, anything. If you've got a hotel and a restaurant and whatever, you can get a shared parking agreement if that's something the 2 businesses want to do. You can do parking studies for those kinds of things. That's stuff that can be done for there. So it's really kind of singling out the liveries by putting that restriction in there, saying you can't do this part of it that we allow everyone else to do. So that part is what's going to be coming out of there for sure. The parking standards is still going to be there. And that is also something, it's not in this part of the code change. That is something that is, city council wants, I believe we're going to have a workshop on that early next year, is discussing some parking stuff. Some of the specific parking requirements, because for example, one thing, a lot of the code changes come up because it's like, oh, nobody thought about that before. We're now seeing some of these boats that have seats 40, 50, 60 people, some of these big tour boats and stuff like that. So with those, what's the parking requirement for a boat that seats 50 people? We don't have anything right now established in our code for that. So we're gonna have to figure that part out. We're gonna have to figure out, is the 1.5 per livery vessel the right number? There's some conflictions in the code between a marina that requires 1 parking space per 2 wet slips, but if you're operating a livery vessel out of that marina, you gotta have 2 for that 1 or 1.5 per boat. So there's some just kind of cross conflictions in there a little bit that we're really hoping to kind of clear up out there. But that's going to be a workshop later on, like I said, specifically dealing with what the parking requirements are. This has nothing to do with the parking requirements. This is just the rules that everything else is going to go by, not the parking.
So without putting an economical strain or blockade on the livery vessel owners, is there a maximum number of boats that each one of these can have versus?
Now that goes back to the medallion thing, like Jeff was talking about there, that we're not trying to put restrictions on anything like that. Obviously you have to have a place to operate the boat out of and stuff like that. So if you've got X number of wet slips, you're going to be limited by the number of boats you can have there safely. But as far as each business, we've got businesses that have 1 boat, and we have businesses that have 30, 40 boats.
Parking ultimately is the limitation, so.
How many do we have in the city right now? Do we have any idea?
Operators?
Yes, sir.
Well, again, that's going to be kind of tough to answer in the off-season. I can tell you that we have 8 right now that are fully compliant with the code. But the problem is sometimes next year, some of those may not come back. Some of the ones that are not compliant may not come back either. It's a very seasonal thing. I do think we probably have a core here that have been here for many years that are kind of your more staple ones. We have seen some pop up and then disappear. Though over the years, I think that's just kind of the nature of it. But we do have several core companies that have been here for a while.
We're talking about places like Beach Weekend right over here, right? The new one that just stood up.
That's one of them. There's a couple of different.
But that's what we're talking about, is a business
Yes.
like that. Okay.
So, but even like in that case there, Beach Weekend has a livery vessel BTR, but then there's also other people who own boats who operate out of there that have their own BTRs and stuff. So, yeah.
You said there were a lot of non-compliance. What were the issues? What was the non-compliant in? The ones that were, where you said very few livery vessel vendors were in compliance in August of 24 or of 23.
A lot of it was a matter of just simply submitting the documentation to the city, because there's certain things that we just required. All livery operators have to be certified by Fish and Wildlife. They get a livery operator certificate. We require that to be submitted to us because that covers a lot of things, because in order to get that, you've got to have all your insurance and you have to have all sorts of stuff done through Fish and Wildlife that, hey, you just show me that you're good with Fish and Wildlife and I'm okay there. We have requirements for like your check-in and check-out location. Some of the requirements in the code for how that had to be, we required a picture of that. The markings on the boat, we had to show, okay, do you have the appropriate markings on your boat that you have? Some had just not submitted the pictures to us showing that their stuff was marked correctly. So some of it was just a matter, they were doing everything correctly. It was a matter of just getting that information corralled.
And just so you know, I have written down the 2 ideas y'all have come up with so far. All vehicles or all vessels get decals. Even though I tried to offer a contrary argument, that'll still be presented to council as an idea that y'all came up with. And
Well,
also,
too, they could turn around and they could come in and say, hey, make this one discontinued right now for the next 30 days or whatever, and I need a new decal because I'm substituting the one that I'm now
I
canceling.
think that if you did the color or some other one like that, though, because this is going to happen generally on
That's
Saturday.
been talked about too, is having, a blue one for normal ones and a yellow for a substitute. But even then, if you see a yellow one, is that a legit substitute or is that just an extra one? There's pros and cons to
it's still
pretty much any way we run this.
Because you're not having anybody actually out there enforcing this per se, like, you have 11 out there, and you're only supposed to have 10.
Yeah, it's not like Fish and Wildlife carries
You're
around
kind
a
of-
roster and
Yeah,
says,
well, they're
oh.
not-
Fish and Wildlife and Coast Guard actually do work very closely with us.
Well, they do-
On a lot of
they
this
enforce
enforcement
stuff like
stuff.
this.
They really will.
So if they see a boat that's got 13, but they know that this livery company only has 10. they're
Now, I don't
gonna-
know about the decal and if they're gonna get involved in that, I don't know. I do know that they worked with us though for some of the residential ones that were happening, and, you know, we don't have boats, so sometimes they're like, hey, if we're in the area, we'll keep an eye out for that property to see what's going on there for it. So they do work with us on these things.
That's
Again,
more where the bareboat definition comes in, because the law enforcement was having an issue of defining, and I don't want to confuse you on what the definition of a bareboat vessel is, but if you have a chance to read it in there, it's basically what's not a livery vessel. And they were having some issues, like pulling some of the rogue operators over because they would claim they were a bareboat charter and not a livery vessel, which would exempt them from the livery ordinance.
I mean, ultimately, it's gonna be up to city council on how they wanna do with the chase boats, replacement boats. Right now, obviously, you know, this is gonna be fleshed out a lot more. My recommendation is probably gonna be to do nothing with them. Let them substitute them out. And the reason I'm kind of thinking that is, again, from that enforcement. I think our best enforcement from this stuff that we've seen over the years is from the legit operators, the people who are doing this stuff correctly. So if they see these boats operating out there without a sticker, and they're gonna call up and say, hey, what's up with this guy? Oh, no, we knew he had a replacement boat in the water. However we can do that, I mean, is really kind of what we're trying to do, is just, I don't want to overburden staff, and I don't want to overburden the operators either, but try to get that happy medium of how can we do this as efficiently as possible and still get the same requirements out there for everybody.
When so much of it happens on the weekend, when there's no staff here anyway.
I would just be worried, like, these are gonna cost, right? You know what I mean, the sticker.
We're estimating about $200,
$200 a season, assuming?
pretty much, yeah.
Year.
I'm guessing we'll do it kind of, if you've seen the golf cart stickers, we have some of those, and sometimes we'll change the color on them from year to year and stuff like that. So it would probably be something similar to that. The city's expecting probably around that $200. It's been discussed, it was in the package, it didn't get discussed at city council about having a nominal fee to the operators, just basically to cover the cost of those stickers. And I'm not talking 200 stickers a boat, I'm talking 200 stickers will give us probably the supply of stickers we need for the year. So if it's a couple of dollars, $5, $10, I don't know what that number would work out, but basically it would probably be an
I just think
cost
for the-
kind of thing for that.
For the chase boats or whatever, and they're a different color, they don't cost as much. Here you go, this is $10
That's a
for these.
possibility.
But you
Anything
can't
like that's
use
gonna
it.
have to actually be amended through the comprehensive fee schedule though, before we can charge anything for it. So that's a whole other project that has to go back before city council, before we can charge any fees for anything. So
it's
right
not-
now, it's just projected it's gonna be about a $200 expense on the city. We don't have any proposed fees to them, because again, that's a whole other process to get that in that fee schedule, before we can charge it.
Yeah, as I said, it's not $200 each year for these guys.
Oh, no, no,
It's
no.
The city, and then
Correct.
these guys are $1 or $2 per sticker or something.
That's the vision right now. Again, I mean, that has not been discussed by city council on how they want to go through with that one. But that's kind of been the staff vision on there, is just, you know, it's a low cost thing to do. It's very minimal cost for the city.
And did you say you had something else?
No, the different color decals, and those are the two ideas that have been generated so far, different color decals, or all vessels just get a decal. And so if y'all have any other ideas on that issue.
I would ask if I could get any feedback on the item I brought up about buffering. Like I said, the intent is right now that
Yeah,
if you
that-
have a hotel, a transient lodging location, and on the same property, they're renting livery vessels, staff doesn't believe that that's really appropriate to make them screen from the hotel, because now you're gonna basically block the water from the hotel so that you can operate your livery vessels there. That just doesn't make a lot of logical sense.
Yeah, what are we talking about screening, just a
What is
fence?
a buffer?
or-
I'm not sure what.
It's basically a wall, a fence, something that basically, okay,
Plants and-
we don't want to necessarily know what's going on over there. Because we do have some single-family homes on the water there, and, you know, sometimes, you know, early on a Saturday morning, maybe give a little bit of a buffer to keep some of the noise and stuff away from those areas. Same thing kind of for the transient lodging stuff on there, but if it's on the same property, then it's just,
Yeah, I would
it's
say
it's not really reasonable to expect that separation on the same property.
I think the side buffers is more important.
I'm sorry?
I think the side buffers are way more important than the same property.
I would agree. Okay.
That's my
Yeah, I would
thoughts.
even suggest if it's, especially if it's residential. I mean, I don't know how I feel if it's, what if there's another one right next to you? Or another business right next to it? Then why do you need a buffer?
Is the wall height, is that a standard size for like a fence? or
It's written in here
anything?
what the buffer requirements are.
Yeah, it says minimum.
Yeah, it's the
6
minimum
feet.
6 foot height.
Is that a standard in the city, like 6 feet, is that a?
That's honestly, so like I said, about 3 years ago, 4 years ago, we started this whole process. We sat down, staff sat down with a bunch of the operators that were here at the time, and we're like, okay, let's invent the wheel here. What do we want? And obviously, we didn't create the wheel. We took some basics and stuff and went from there, and that's one of the things that came up with on there, basically was separating from the residential and transient lodging uses, just separating that buffer on there, just to give a little bit of a,
So you're talking
whether it's
6
keeping
foot
people
fence
over there.
all the way up to the water line.
And we would be reasonable on that one. It just needs to buffer it there. I mean, if it's two separate properties, I mean, we let fences go right to the water.
Well, yeah, I'm just thinking that if I have a residential property on the water and I have to overlook this, they're renting about boats, I don't really care but if it's 6 foot fence is blocking my view, that's different.
Yeah.
So,
So do you guys think there should not be any buffers? Is that?
well, I mean, I
What
like
I'm
the
hearing
residential
here,
buffer,
I
but I think that should be more up to the residents next to it, rather than making a blanket statement. If the residents say, yeah, I want a fence there, I don't want to see it, the house next to it, then yeah.
So something similar to when you build a dock, you initially ask the neighboring properties if they consent to, when you're building a dock, the neighboring properties have to consent if it's a certain size dock, if it's built within the setback area on the property. And so in this situation, you're saying you would notify the neighboring property that there's going to be a livery business there, and will they basically object to no buffer being there, and if they do object, then require the buffer?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
So,
I'm just trying to think logistically on that one. I mean, we can write whatever. Just off the top of my head, though, I'm thinking, when you sell that property and a new owner gets in there and they decide they want a fence now.
well, similar to
Well,
if
then
you have
they'd
a
have to
dock.
build it.
If a dock's there, the new
It's
owner
existing.
can't object to it.
Yeah.
So that's-
Yeah, you'd have to build it, they'd have to build it. if they want it.
Yeah, we can definitely present that as an option. Any other
Questions?
I do
input
like that.
ideas?
I do like that.
I'm guessing some of the operators
Yes.
want to talk on this one, but I know we've done this kind of more like a workshop, but ultimately we will need either a recommendation for approval to city council or denial. And you can recommend it with all changes, however you want to make that motion on there.
Okay.
All right, thank you. Anybody wants to? Come on.
Yeah, so.
Can you state your name and
Couple
address?
things like.
Can you,
Name
sorry.
and address.
I'm sorry?
Name and address.
Oh, sorry, Kevin O'Neill, my address, well, my business address and my home address.
Business is fine.
Business is, what are we,
322.
322 at the Quality in there with no buffer on the beach, I guess. Yeah, so the buffer and the fueling issues, a real big one. I think when we talk about some of these bills, we get concerned about unintended consequences. I know because I deal with that at the state level. I also run an online voter safety. We're registered with the state of Florida and NASBA to offer. So we deal with NASBA, which is National Association of State Voting Law Administrators. And we also deal with the state as well. So we have it on every single end. And when this stuff happens in a vacuum, so I feel like this bill is I think you call it drastic, right? A drastic change. So once we all got in line with the current regulations, we had a drastic rehaul. And so my first question is, why? Why did we have this drastic rehaul? I mean, I don't think there's ever been but 2 people outside of our institution that even come speak on this. I don't know if there's If the public's calling, if the customers, or if the public has concerns about buffers or fueling, why are they never at any of these meetings? Why are they never here with their pitchforks and torches and like, oh, you know what I mean? We need buffers, no more fueling on the dock. So to your question, Destin doesn't have that fueling restriction. So Maya can speak to that a little bit more because she deals with it, but the first iteration of the regulations was just that we had not fire suppression, but a fire plan. And that was drafted by, you guys had the same person draft your fire plan, everybody, right? Regardless. We basically got the same fire plan put together. And the parking regulations, all of this stuff, we worked with council to come up with something that worked for everyone. This drastic change, and I realize that some of it, like the communication aspect of it, I understand. The initial regulations worked for everybody, for marina owners, for restaurant owners who wanted to rent slips out, to bareboat charters and liveries. At the federal level, they don't recognize livery. Everyone's a bareboat charter, jet ski rental, boat rental, anybody driving a boat rental, charter for hire, and bareboat charter, what the Coast Guard recognizes, right? So I just sort of say this all to first ask what happened, how did we get all in compliant, and then a massive overhaul to make us all not in compliant. So I didn't really have anything prepared, so I don't mean to stream of conscious, but this is what I did. Yeah, so the fuel is a big one. If we can't fuel on our docks, because it was the safety and fire marshal who only thing we could use was the 5-gallon cans with the safety nozzle. Like we were like, how about this? No. How about this? No. How about this? No. So the only reason that we're using 5-gallon cans is because that's what she recommended. That's all she would accept. And now it's the only thing in there that's prohibited. So there's a problem there. So if you guys go, hey, we're prohibiting 5-gallon gas cans, and she goes, well, that's all I'll accept, then we're left with one of two options. One, fueling at gas stations, which is like insanity. Or two, the one marina that sells gas here. The public will be here then. I guarantee it. They're like, I can't get gas, dude. There's 60 boats here trying to get gas. And so, like, we have a split there. So I'm a huge fan of the gas caddies, OSHA-approved gas caddies. It's just that if we regulate from at the land development code level, and you guys say, hey, we're gonna ban this, and then she's like, this is all I'll accept. And those of us that don't own marinas are kind of put in a position of going to our landlords and being like, hey man, can we put a 500 gallon fuel thing? And then also building fuel docks, because that's the other portion of it. So I can't just put a 500 gallon fuel and then run the hose down my dock, because she's not gonna accept that either. So then it's like you have to actually build fuel docks. So if you build fuel docks, it's like, it could be a 3 to 5 year process. So like we're in the process of just expanding our submerged land lease has taken almost 2 years, and we can't even drop a piling in the ground. So I circle back on this to just say that like some of the language in here has a lot of concerning unintended consequences to them, that if we create this inside of a vacuum and we don't work together to figure out some of these changes, and we get back before council and we pass it, and we can have a bunch of people sitting in these different chairs, or on city council that want to interpret this a different way. And to the point of like how many votes do we have? Nowhere near the same amount as Destin. It's something like maybe 20-25%, something like that. Like 500-600 livery vessels in the entire county of Okaloosa. We're like the smallest market. So at what point do we say like, oh, we don't want hotels being able to come here, restaurants build on some of these parcels and offer amenities to their guests and their people coming here, and they're not going to be able to do that because we have a lot of language that can be interpreted different by people that don't necessarily, share our same values, I guess.
So I just have a question. Tim, you might be able to answer this. So I remember you saying something about the fuel cans.
Yes, so that's one of the things that it came up. I'll tell you, a lot of these changes came from a lot of various locations.
So what's
people had input
concern?
on these changes that they wanted to see. This is one that What he's saying is absolutely 100% true. The initial iteration was a fuel and hazardous material handling plan that had to be approved by the city's fire marshal. And there was a lot of back and forth with a lot of these companies over different fueling things, metal cans versus plastic cans versus all sorts of different things, wagons, carrying cans. A lot of different stuff went back and forth to get them to where they are right now. This is what was written into there. I will tell you, it's already gotten pushback, not only from the operators, but from other people outside of this. Some individual council members, it wasn't really discussed at council, but some individual council members have stated that they want to see that change as well. They want that to come out. The last I saw on that was early this week. Kind of a proposal for maybe like the wagons with the hoses. I'm gonna butcher what all that stuff is, but a wagon with a fuel hose on it might be a better way to go with these things. That's been sent over to Leanne, our fire marshal, to kind of get her input on it. I have not seen back on that one. I don't know if I just wasn't copied on it or what. So we're looking at several opportunities, because what we don't want to do is make them all go to the one fuel dock, and now you got 100 boats, you know, waiting hours to try to fuel up.
Are we just throwing these ideas out and then going to the fire marshal, or are we getting the fire marshal involved in this from the get-go? I mean, because that seems kind of silly that we just keep coming up with things, and then, hey, how about this? How about this? How about we go to the fire marshal and say, what should we do?
That has been done, and the problem is the Florida Fire Code is extremely vague when it comes to these things. For her, the way that she reads it and interprets it is really, I guess, the metal fuel cans, the big jerry cans, are the only things that should be used per the actual Florida Fire Code, is my understanding. I'm not a fire guy, so don't quote me on that. So that's where it kind of became this, okay, let's work back and forth. What's realistic and what's functional and what's there. So she has been very involved in this from the very get-go, and at every step of the way on here. It's really just trying to get that narrowed down on what would be allowable. I mean, her as a fire marshal, her ultimate ideal would be, yes, everybody needs to go to a proper fuel dock and fuel up there. There's less chance of anything happening there than there will be for any wagon, gas can carried, anything like that. But at one point what's too extreme? And that's where it's kind of working in between right now to kind of come up with something that's workable but still safe.
I mean, I could see you having an area of your dock. This is where we will fuel. We will not fuel in place because you have, I'm assuming you have people coming in and out, maybe smoking, maybe not going onto the boats. Well, over in this area, these 7, 5, whatever slots, the boats will come over here, fuel them up, move them to where they go, or something similar. I know that's probably,
So,
I don't want to say unreasonable.
so you're saying don't restrict the method of fueling, but just make it safer?
Yeah.
Okay, and
Yeah,
is that?
That's a good point.
Have a designated spot. is what you're saying.
Yes, so, I mean, just again, I can only speak for my business, but I have one dock that goes down. And it's like, that would be impossible for me. So I just imagine fingerling docks, one single dock. That's the only, unless they swim there, unless my customer to swim there. But she's like, you know, if you put something adjacent, but again, in order for me to break ground, I have to break ground there and create a separate fuel dock. I'd have to have 2 separate docks. And I'm not the only one that, I mean, arguably.
Yeah, I mean,
You can't make your last slip your fuel area.
I'm not saying necessarily separate dock, just
Because we still have to run the hose down.
Yeah.
We have
But if you're carrying a wagon, right, so that's your designated fuel area, you wheel your wagon down, or your jerry cans.
Yeah, we could do that's.
Like you
Yeah, that would be fine, but I think you were talking about actually having like a hose running down from like a.
No, I'm just talking about just an area.
Yeah,
Just
100%.
an
I
area,
can do that.
not necessarily, this is the only place this is, so I'm not gonna have fuel over here where the majority of my people are leaving out of.
100%. That we could do. That's doable.
And I would assume the fire marshal would want it, your fuel location, as far away from populace as possible, in case something does catch on fire, it's not impacting the neighboring docks, the boats, the traffic.
So her pushback is still going to be the method by which you get the fuel. So if I put it out on my T-head, right, and I say, hey, I'm just going to fuel here, cans whatever, by whatever method, she's gonna push back and say, only unless you use these 5-gallon cans. But, so my issue is that since it's her ultimately that makes that decision, like this is the same thing with like when we started getting into submerged land lease territory, where it's like if she ultimately makes that decision, then how can city council pass an ordinance unless it has her stamp of approval on it, right?
It sounds to me like the whole fueling portion needs to come out of the ordinance. Because if the fire chief is actually, or the, whatever you call it, if she's actually going to be the one to police this, then, I mean, she's apt to interpret it differently from time to time. What's the reason for us putting it into the ordinance would be my question, Mr.
She
Dixon.
leaves.
Again, I mean, I'm not the one who's making any of these decisions on here.
Right.
It's ultimately going to be city council. If that's your recommendation, is to pull it completely out of here.
I was just curious
I'll say
what the
I don't
history
believe
was.
That's what they would be willing to go for, because they do want to have some regulations on here. I think ultimately it's going to come down to codifying what some of the best practices that are going on right now are. Because from what I understand, and you can correct me if I'm wrong, if they've got customers walking out on the dock, they're not going to be sitting there fueling a boat right beside the customers that are walking out there. They're going
I
to
should
get them
hope
going,
not.
and then they're going to be. They do it very safely as it is right now. They've all worked with the fire marshal. They've all tried to get this. It's really just a matter of trying to codify this in here.
Well, then maybe we need to take out what they use to fuel with
I
and
don't
replace
see
it
that in
with.
here. Where's that in here that it says?
It's under subsection 12. It says use of portable fueling cans is prohibited, which is extremely common. Because you could even argue that the wagons and stuff are portable fueling cans.
Right.
I will tell you, I can't guarantee because, well, I'm not the one making these decisions, but I can almost guarantee you that is not going to be in the final version of this.
So let me ask you
It's
this.
going to be changed. I don't
Okay.
know what that's going to look like. I do know that it's already, that's why, that's one of the 5, out of all this, I brought up 5 items, that's one of them, because I know that's going to change.
So
Okay.
what's
just
defined
not-
as a fueling can?
What's that?
What's defined as a fueling can?
Bingo.
That's what I'm saying. It's a very broad thing. That's what I'm saying. I don't believe that statement is going to end up in the final version.
For Leanne, it's the portable with the safety nozzle on it.
OSHA approved.
Correct, because do you remember because it's not OSHA, it was. What is it?
DOT.
Yeah. So like, I mean, in South Florida when we ran boats, I mean, we did use those, you get them from West Marine, 100 gallon, 60 gallon, whatever they are, caddies, like, we just, any type of ability to be able to fuel on our dock using some type of safe, portable, like, all that, us pulling our boats out of the water, us going to the fuel, like, that's just, I mean, for me personally, it's a business killer, you know what I mean? Because again, so like you asked about Destin, like what works for Destin. So for them, for Destin, it's like they can fill up their boats at night, and realistically, like that boat could go 2-3 times because it's going to Crab Island. For us, we have so many more utilization hours that we're fueling in between, and that's where it becomes a challenge. Yeah, if I was right next to Crab Island, I'd be like, yeah, what do you guys want to do? I'll fill up at a dock, and you know, I'd also have a lot more money. I'd be making in fuel costs.
So Jeff,
But anyway,
can we suggest taking out 12 then?
Yeah, you do that. One thing I was maybe suggesting y'all do too is maybe invite the fire marshal to
That's
one
what
of
I
the
was thinking.
meetings. Publicly, so you get some direction on, because if the council decides not to remove the entire thing, this doesn't keep getting circulated the whole time and everyone's confused. If she's the ultimate decision maker on some of these issues, bring her in so she can answer questions. So I know they've done stuff like that out in Destin on some of these livery issues. The Coast Guard showed up to answer questions at the city council meetings. And so has anyone ever reached out to invite this lady?
Yeah, some of the initial ones, some of the council members wanted to be very involved with this rewrite and stuff. One of them in particular, there was meetings with the fire marshal, with myself, with the city manager, with the council members, with Ms. Cox, city attorney and stuff, to try to get some of this stuff started.
This is more like
Fuel was one of the things that was brought up during that one.
This is more like invite her to the actual council meeting, just so she can
Yeah.
kind of present it and has she ever done that?
I can pass that recommendation on along. I mean,
Is that something they'll should, because I can't.
I think that needs
Fire
to
chief
happen.
is typically
Can we
out.
just exclude this with no?
Invite her to the city council meeting.
Just city council meeting.
Yeah, I would definitely suggest that. I would say get rid of 12 also, and if you're gonna put anything in there about fueling, it be a DOT, OSHA, whatever approved fueling.
Yeah,
Yeah,
that's what I was
that's what
gonna
I
say.
said. Why not just say fueling method must meet a
Fire
And
marshal.
store-
fire marshal approved, whatever
Well, again, that gets
regulations?
very nebulous there too into what's approved.
Well, you can
and
say
stuff. That's
DOT
where we're trying to
approved,
get
right? Because DOT.
I mean,
I'll tell you this.
so like what you said, like that's what the process was with her. We were like, well, like she was like, yeah, like it was just like keep coming back, you know. I'm like, how about this? No, okay, just tell me what you want. You know?
Yeah, I mean, I would say you definitely want to get her input on it, but I wouldn't put the fire marshal's approval here because the fire marshal isn't going to be the fire marshal, the same fire marshal 10 years from now or whatever.
Yeah, she wants
They
me
might have
to, you know, like siphon it out of my car and stuff. It's like, all right, lady, you know.
But I think if you, I mean, there is a approved canisters.
I will
that are
say this
approved.
much,
You can't, they have to be red, they have to have a safety cap on them, they have to.
From the city council meeting, if any of you guys watched it or whatever like that, I'll tell you, this was not like extensively discussed on what this should become. What was discussed is that this is not gonna happen. What we're not gonna do is not allow them to fuel at their locations and stuff, not make them go to these fuel docks because it's inconvenient. There's too few of them for the number of boats we got there, and it like doubles the price of the gas and stuff like that. So these are things that the council was already aware of, and they've already said, this is not going to happen. What it's gonna look like, that's what I don't know. I will tell you right now, again, that's why I brought that specific one up, is because we know that's a problem area in here. What that needs to look like, if it needs to come out completely, if it needs to, allow for the wagons, if it needs to just not say anything, then okay. That's what we're really trying to get here. What do we wanna take to council to say?
I would say the
what is
first
it?
thing is to take it out completely, but if they don't accept that, then I would say that they must be approved
DOT.
DOT or whoever
Or
the
whatever
approval
the
authority
standard
is
is,
on
right.
these cans with, safety valves, which I'm sure is all in there anyway. If it's approved, it's gonna have that.
My only,
Stupid safety.
again, I'm gonna play devil's advocate on some of this stuff. So what happens next week when they're out there with, empty water jugs full of gas?
Well, those aren't approved.
Those aren't approved by DOT.
But that's, okay, yeah.
You gotta
sure.
put something in there. It's gotta be
Okay.
approved.
Yeah, we gotta have something in there is what I'm getting
Yeah,
at.
if you're gonna put that in there, it's gotta be approved.
And then I
You can't do it in a gas station.
About the non-transferable. Just to get a little clarity on that. So if I want to sell my business, like in total, is there that an impediment or a process by which that I have to go before?
Yeah.
I can just sell it as is. They can change the name, there's bills, Pontugo Reynolds, whatever they want to do. Okay.
If it's a business sale, then that's just a normal business sale. You're gonna sell your business, they're gonna operate, you've got 10 boats that are operating out of this location. They meet all the code requirements, they've got all their stickers, and I'm gonna buy them from you. Well, now, they still meet all those code requirements. What they're getting at with the transference is, you can't take your 5 of your 10 boats, and say, I'm gonna sell them over here to him, who's gonna run them over there, because, well, now, does that meet the code requirements at the new location when you add 5 boats over there?
Understood.
That was the concern with the transferring of the stickers, not really selling of a business.
Awesome. All right.
Thank you.
Everyone.
All right. Anybody else?
Hi, I'm Shilder, 45 Ferry Road, Fort Walton Beach. I had I managed delivery in Destin for 8 years. I was at the start of the moratorium, so I'm pretty well versed in it. I've also worked here in Fort Walton for the last year, and I ran a livery here for 3 years. So as far as the chase vessel goes, state statute requires, state statute require? Yes. You do have to have a chase vessel there. The way Destin handled it, you submitted that a dedicated chase vessel, FL, to the city when you submitted the rest of your FLs to the city for your fleet, and that was a different color. The chase vessel sticker was a different color than the rest of the vessels. As far as swapping equipment in and out, insurance does it one way. I know when you submit some insurances are nice. When you submit your fleet, all of your VIN numbers, if you are going to only run 35 vessels, but you have 50, you submit all 50, and then you call in and you do a swap. So it can be an email to the city, to code, it can be a phone call, and this is my entire fleet. These are the ones I'm operating on a daily basis. These are my backup vessels. And then a simple email, your regular fleet would get the stickers. Your backup vessel, your chase would get a different color sticker, like a yellow sticker, black stickers for your regular boats. Your backup vessels, they have those on record. If you buy new ones, you just send an email. Hey Tim, I just bought new vessels. These are my backup vessels, or I'm swapping out and I need new stickers because I'm replacing vessels. And a simple email or a phone call, if it's over the weekend, an email would always be retroactive to the situation. And you just shoot over an email. Vessel sticker number 124 is down, substituting it with FL 2435, whatever. It's a pretty simple, streamlined process if you just think about it that way.
That's what I was talking about with, not putting stickers on there, because, well, then if for the next 5 months, just 7 boats with no stickers, that's gonna be pretty obvious. And that's kind of what we were talking about with swapping out those backup boats and stuff. It's exactly that.
Yeah.
I think the email idea is a great idea.
And I think, just a small, I know your email gets really full, but possibly even for that situation, just a dedicated livery email that's monitored by somebody in the city, just one that's just for livery information like that. As far as the fuel cans, it is not practical. I worked with a marina, and I think she's going to talk in a minute. They have a lot of small operators. To ask somebody who has one boat to be driving around a 60-some-odd gallon fuel can down the docks, that's just not practical. And when you are making some of these decisions and thinking about it, not all operators are large operators like Kevin, or Beach Weekend. Some of these operators have 1 or 2 boats, so you have to kind of think about it in the totality of how it works for large operators and small operators, and try and find a good middle road so it works for everybody that's involved.
Great input.
Thank you.
Good evening, Billy Rosentuler, 322 Miracle Strip Parkway, Southwest.
Pull the mic down a little bit if you would, because we can't hear it. Thank you.
Is that better?
Yeah, thank
Okay.
you. And what was your name,
Just
sir?
want to kind of address some of the points that were already addressed and get a little bit of clarification. How are you doing this evening?
Can I interrupt you for a second? The audio in this room is awful, and I apologize to everybody. Can you state your name one more time for me?
Ilya Rosentuler.
Can you spell it for me?
Yep. India Lima Yankee Alpha. Last name is Romeo Oscar Zulu Echo November Tango Uniform Lima Echo Romeo.
Thank you.
So, did have a couple of questions. So, with regards to, and I think Tim, you already covered this. So, if you guys are aware that some of the permitting requirements are a little vague, and you did mention that during the let's say during season, we do acquire additional boats that it's not clearly stated how to handle that portion.
I think that's gonna be an easy fix, is just gonna be adding something in there that, should, it arise that you need to change this stuff, then, just a simple verification that you're still in compliance, and then new stickers it'll be a simple fix to add that in there. It's just nothing in there right now.
Okay. Similarly, I don't really see any language with regards to in case something is denied, reapplication, like a reapplication process, or how that would be handled if there was a problem. It just has flat language about denials, and then kind of the end there. Since we are kind of going through a major overhaul of the current ordinance or the current rules that are in place, I would like to draw attention to item 3 now, A, and this is basically a submittal of the
Which page?
So 1, 2, 5.
Some of the renumbering and striking
7.
underline gets very complicated.
Should be number 3, application for permits. Applications for any permits shall set forth and or include the minimums. The first part, talking about the submerged land lease and requiring the submittal of that. I do have a bit of a problem in terms of a lot of the additional language past the just having a submerged land lease, as that we also need to provide a scale drawing with locations for mooring of all vessels. This does basically not allow operators who, let's say, have all the parking, have everything but enough slips for each vessel, but are able to, because they have boat launch on site, to be able to drop additional vessels at the start of the day, pull them out at the end of the day.
See what you're getting at. Yeah, we can present that. I mean, that's in the existing language.
Right, and since we are...
No, let's see what you're saying, basically.
Yeah, so...
You still account for all the boats you're gonna use, but you can drop them in the water without having wet slips for them.
Right, or because the section basically about mooring is under the jurisdiction of the FDEP, so it doesn't make sense to have additional regulation, you know, that's already covered in terms of requirements for mooring. We've covered in part and I kind of do want to draw attention to the next section, section B. I find the language a little too vague. Just starting out, fueling plan approved by the city in addition to any city requirements, including but not limited to fire department requirements. So this additional line creates a vague set of requirements that we are basically, as operators, may not always be aware of. So clearly defining what the regulations in terms of fueling plans. Storage plan.
So there's a state reg, and then there's a county reg, and then there's a city regulation for this stuff?
I mean, there's Florida stat, I mean, you can go at the Coast Guard level as well, I mean, and stuff. But as far as like what's being followed here, I mean, there's some state requirements that they have to have for like insurances and safety briefings and postings and stuff like that. But the county rules and stuff would not really apply to them here. It's just the city rules and stuff. So the county will have delivery vessel requirements in their land development code, but they would not apply to this group here. That only our rules would apply. But the state statutes, obviously state law is state law.
So you're just talking, he just wants guidance on this refueling plan.
Right.
Yeah, a little bit more specific you know, I mean, we have the one thing later on that has already been addressed and discussed is the topic of the fuel cans. But as I said, in this language that I'm reading, it's a little too vague in terms of what are the regulations that we have to abide by. Okay, so city managers.
I know some developments I've worked out in Destin, some of the marinas, they had to submit fueling plans. I didn't get into the details of what they did, but that's something some folks will know the answer to. So I think we can take a look at what they've done before to do fueling plans.
Yeah, I have a feeling they probably did this because every one of you guys is different, so it's kind of hard to make a generic, you have to do this. Well, my site doesn't allow me to do that.
And this is where, again, going back to the discussion about it, you know, what may work in one location will not work and shouldn't be applied to another location in terms of, you know, safety and efficiency, in terms of refueling, because of different layouts, different, you know, needs. So it does create a difficulty in creating regulations, you know, broad regulation that will apply equally to everyone.
Are you guys required to ground your boats like with like an aircraft? You know, before you fuel an aircraft, you got to ground it. Are you guys required to ground your boats when you're refueling? Does like the fire department require you guys to do that?
I can't answer that because, I mean, I don't know. I don't think so. I'd have to look. I haven't read our fuel safety plan in a while. It's handled by our dock manager. But, you know, this is something kind of going back to leisure vessels when they pull up to
Yeah, you
a,
don't have to do it.
yeah, to a fueling
But
vessel.
around it is a metal boat.
So part of the issue,
Fiberglass might not be.
so, sorry to drag the fueling topic on further, but we are having a bit of a problem with the going back and forth and trying to get safe and efficient practices in place and being basically denied those and having very narrow ways that we can do it for a risk that is very low in our area. And one of the things that was noted was in terms of grounding and things like that, that's for static discharges. That is not an issue so much here in Florida due to the high humidity that we deal with. That is more of a dry climate. So again, and why, let's say, fire safety codes are a little bit vague and open to interpretation is because what works in one area of the country may not work the same. So, I mean, I would love to actually see like some actual data. What kind of problems do we have in terms of fueling boats, and fires may be low on the list versus gas spillage, which is
The
more
gas
of an
spillage.
environmental
I
problem.
think that's a bigger concern, actually. I think it's the
So-
gas spillage.
Yeah, well, right now, a lot of the proposals that we've presented to help prevent gas spillage were denied, and we're actually being forced into more unsafe in some cases.
What are some of the ideas? Because I doubt the city council's ever heard any of those ideas. And we're going to come up with a list of ideas that came from this meeting, so.
Right,
if you wanna
and
spit
this
them
is
out.
where I think the idea to get, you know, the fire marshal and to really discuss what actually makes sense for our location, for our businesses,
If only we had a Coast Guard
that-
station here.
that balances the safety aspect with, you know, not just the fire safety, but all levels of safety. Moving on to, this is going to be fourth from the end. Section E, issuance or refusal of permit. I guess we already discussed that. The city manager is designee shall compliance portion. So yeah, I just mentioned that earlier. We don't have a good language to say what happens in the case of denial, what happens during, you know, in between the permitting.
And we can probably clean up some language in there, but I'll tell you, I mean, it more than likely, again, it's gonna be city council's decisions on these things, but it's gonna be the same thing that we've always done here is,
Yeah.
I'll just
Working-
keep working
yeah.
with you
And
until
I-
you get
yeah.
compliant. There's
I
not
do
gonna be a
appreciate
no,
that.
deny, try again next year. That is not gonna happen. It's gonna be a matter of, nope, you still need to give me this picture, nope, you still need to give me this plan. I will continue to work with all of you on getting
Right.
everything legit with this thing.
And then I would say then the final note that I have is on the next subsection F, permit not transferable. So based on the intent of what you were describing of transferring permits from location, unfortunately, this really doesn't cover that. It covers the business aspect of equipment or entity sales.
I agree.
So
That is
I-
something that was discussed a lot at city council though, was that transference thing. And they were very clear on that their intent, now, I'm not saying we don't clean something up in here, but their intent on that one is that it's for transference of boats from one location to another.
So I think
Not
then
sale of
that
business.
language, because this does also preclude, and I did talk to Tim, I talked to Chris, that in terms of the sale of businesses can happen in kind of two ways and a range within that, but you have the sale of the entire entity covering the assets as well as liabilities, or you can have a pure asset sale. And if you have a pure asset sale where we're saying, hey, we're selling you our lease, we're selling you the boats, you're not buying the actual business entity to not take on the liability portion, but you're buying all the assets, you're staying in the same location, under that, that would still meet the intent, but does not meet the language.
I think actually Ms. Kopp recommended that they do that anyway at the last meeting. I think she had made a comment, because I remember watching the video, and she said something to that effect, that they'll kind of flush the language out to allow that.
Yeah.
But just to let you know, there is a provision in the land use code for appealing administrative decisions. Already, it's been in there for years. It's under Chapter 8, under 8.03.00. And technically, since this is under the land use code, right, Tim, the livery vessel?
It's in the LDC.
Yeah, so if you disagreed enough with Mr. Gibson, and you wanted to proceed under this route, there's a way to appeal them, and actually would go before the LPA.
Right.
This board right here, they would actually make the decision whether or not to overturn Mr. Gibson. So there is a process in there, just so you know.
Okay,
So-
no, and that's fine, like I said. Well,
No, I know. I just figured
we've
to let
worked
you know.
very well together. He's been very helpful in this whole process. We're trying to
I'm not
clean up the
telling you to
language
appeal
here.
Tim either.
Yeah.
I'm saying it's in there already. That's why they
We love to
put
turn
it
them over.
separate.
I have something with the permits here. When we're talking about the permits, you're talking about a single permit, or are we talking about each individual vessel's permit or decal? What is this referring to?
So permits is probably the wrong word. So there's the business tax receipt, and that's
Right.
just the annual business tax for doing the business. This is going to be, well, I guess it does say permit. Permit probably not
This
the
is
best
permit
word.
everywhere.
Permit's more building permit kind of stuff whenever you start talking to the city. But this is essentially the decals.
Because
The
I think
decals
that
that are gonna go, or whatever it's gonna be.
And I
It's
think
gonna go
their
on the boat to
intention
say,
with
these
the-
are good.
With the decals is, by saying non-transferable, is if you get rid of that boat, the decal doesn't go with it. He has to get your name on that decal. I mean, the decal can stay, but it has to be the new owner's name referred to on that decal.
That's correct.
I think that's what you're trying to,
Yeah, and that also ties into the other thing, and this came from your discussion after the last city council as well on it. There's no process in here for changing it once it's been done. So you come in and you get your stickers at the beginning of the season, and then 2 months later, he wants to buy 5 new boats. Well, you can't transfer the stickers. Well, how can he get 5 new stickers? There's no process in there. So that once we flush both of those out, I think it will make more sense in there for how these are gonna go in there. But the intent is basically that, yes, there's a process, so if you want to expand your fleet, your business is doing great and you can still meet the code requirements, giddy up, let's do it. But it needs to be verified that we're still able to meet the code without the boat just going, oh, they're here today, they're down here tomorrow, or next week they're over there. That's what the transferability limitation is intended to be, is that the boats are gonna stay in one spot because that's where they've been verified that they're meeting the code.
Okay. And then just to verify, we are basically scrapping the buffering, or what's the current,
my suggestion was that they go to the neighbors on either side and get their
approval or disapproval.
yeah, because the issue, and this is what I brought up to Tim after he stated, was that the current, the update that's currently presented basically doesn't change what was already,
It actually adds more requirements.
creates additional requirements, whereas we were trying to modify the requirements.
That was specifically for your situation.
Yeah, exactly.
And then it got twisted down the road there.
Yeah, because,
To
yeah.
be worse. So yes, that was not the intent.
Jeff, you were saying there's verbiage about a dock, right? So if he puts up a dock.
That's state law, like if you build a certain dock and you don't basically self-permit now, there's a process that you can self-permit. But they used to have it for all residential docks, but now it's really only for commercial docks. If you build within, I think it's 20 or 25 feet of the property line, you have to get the permission of the neighboring owner to build within what's called a setback under the state statute. And so what I was suggesting is maybe one way to go about it is if a new livery business opens up on a parcel of property, then you go to the neighboring owner and get their permission whether or not they'll require a buffer or not, like, a fence to be built, so they don't have to look at it.
So then if they get the approval from the current neighbor and then they move out, and somebody else comes in, if they're like, hey, I want a buffer there, well, that's on them to put a fence up. not,
It'd be,
Not
yeah,
the
because
tax, right?
effectively, they'd be grandfathered in and not
Yeah.
had to have the buffer, the existing business would be. And so now that business left and, not through like an asset sale or, but the use changed and, for a couple of years and maybe another liver business came in and took over after it had not been used for a while, then they would have to go through the process again with the new owner and get their permission.
Well, and I've got a question about that because in the language it says the city shall require solid wall, fence, landscape buffer, or wall, or should be a minimum of 6 feet in height. I thought that was the maximum feet. Is that not correct?
No, for the MX2 zone properties that are along the waterfront,
Okay.
well, actually everywhere in the city, for like rear and side yards, the maximum is 8 feet now. Even in your
okay.
residential neighborhoods, that's changed a couple years ago to 8 feet.
Okay, that's good to know. Thank you.
And I want to clarify as well, just to make sure we're all on the same page and language with this. We're not scrapping anything or deleting anything out of this. What we're doing right now is getting recommendations that are going to be presented to city council.
Perfect.
We don't have the authority to take anything out or really change anything in here. Well, we can go and change things, but then it's got to get represented at a first reading of the city council and stuff. So ultimately, stuff coming out, stuff getting changed is going to be city council's decision on these things. This is just, we're really trying to get all this stuff so we can get it presented to city council from, here's the input from the operators, here's the input from the LPA, and everything that we can see on there.
Okay.
Yeah, I think the whole buffer thing is, I mean, the rules for it are fine, the walls should be this, but I think it should still be up to the neighboring.
And that was one of the initial ones, the way that it was written initially with this stuff was basically that you had to separate, to have that buffer between any livery vessel operator and then any residential or transient lodging. And in their case, well, if there's transient lodging on the same property that they operate,
Yeah.
so how do you buffer? It didn't make sense
Yeah,
in
take
that
that
case.
out.
So that's why we just changed, well, from adjacent properties is what it was intended to be. But if it needs to come out, then okay.
Real quick, just on the, so on the advice from, I think the one council member who's been the architect of most of this, what he told me was that the buffer language was put in there for along 98. So if you don't have boats sitting on the side of the road and there's some type of buffer between, it's like for city blight. So last time I talked to him, I'm like, what's this buffer thing? And he was like, well, we want to have the buffer language in there because we want to make sure that, like at Beach Weekend, like he's got his boats all stored over there, he's got a fence up there, and they do have similar language in Destin. And so I think that was the main use case for the idea of this buffer. And I don't really think anybody's got too much of an issue with it. You know, I can't speak for everybody, but
And the only issue I've heard from anybody is in y'all's situation.
yeah, I mean, he just read the language and was like, you know, this could affect us. So I think they wanted to have something in there that created, you know, because of blight, not having boats like all along the side of the road with some kind of fencing up. So there might be anything.
But this buffer is only referring to next door, it's not referring to street. Yeah. It's only referring to side to side.
The sides, yeah, that's the intent in there. So I mean, there is other stuff in the code that I think maybe what the council member you're talking to was referencing for the dry storage of watercraft. There is shielding and buffering requirements on those that it has to be fully enclosed and not visible from there. This is specifically the side to side to separate the residential and transient lodgings from whatever those livery vessel operators are. It doesn't really have to do with the right of way. There is buffering for that, but that's in a different section of the code.
Gotcha.
Hi, my name's Luisa Garcia, and I own the two marinas across the street, 36 and 38 Miracle Strip Parkway. I've owned the 38 one since 2009, so I've got a little bit of, you know, my experience that I may be able to bring to this table, and I appreciate all of you listening to me. So back to the livery. A livery is a boat for hire. So basically, you know, we're just renting out boats. You can rent out, you know, the other ones. Maya should have explained the liveries, and they used to be managed by Fish and Wildlife. Again, we're talking about things that happen in the water, anything that had jurisdiction in the water. I had the first water sport business back in 2012, and when I owned just 38, and then I did the GI Jades, and then I got the next marina. And so it was very simple. I agree with Kevin that it has become very drastic, very controlled, and all these rules and regulations that have been imposed on all these small businesses. Most of them are repetitive things that are already controlled by Department of Environmental Protection, which is our submerged land leases, the state Fish and Wildlife. And so we kind of sometimes feel like we're doing this over and over again, and it used to be just simple. We got our BTRs. I agree with the safety part of the city. I agree with anything that they try to regulate that's on land. I agree with all that. If we want to touch on some of the subjects like fueling, I own a marina, and so how do I pass an inspection with the fire department? My docks, every so many feet, I can't remember if it's 75 feet or not, I have to have a fire extinguisher. I own 144 slips, 3 docks. So in the livery business, we're also required to have fire extinguishers. So if in this last year, we were so busy across the street, thank God, because the economy was down like 17, well, we were down 17%, but the water sport business still went well. And I can tell you that I didn't have a single spill. And I had probably 12 liveries or more. The whole dock was full. So we didn't have spills. And yes, the guys had the canisters, and I brought this up at the council meeting, that we had the caddies. Some people had the caddies, and yes, the fire marshal is looking about safety, and she wants metal cans. Those metal cans get really hot. If you're out there in the month of July, it gets extremely hot. So I agree with you that some of these things don't really need to be regulated by the city. The city has spent so many hours into all these rules and regulations that they keep imposing, and it keeps changing, and it keeps asking for more. This past year, everyone had to submit a submerged land lease. Well, that's my submerged land lease, and I'm a bona fide marina, and so I own 2 submerged land leases. So, and I appreciate what they're trying to do, and I think that they're trying to do something that Destin was doing, and it's kind of impacted us and how we can do business in Fort Walton Beach. So when you talk about creating a livery rules and regulations, you're kind of making these rules, and every time I went and spoke to him, I'm a marina, and in my marina, the Land Development Code says I can park for every 2 vessels, 1 boat. So when they made the rules and regulations for us livery people, it's 1.5 for every, 1.5 parking for every boat. So see if we can understand this. For every 2 vessels, my Land Development Code only allows me 1 parking. For every vessel, they want 1.5. So basically what the city was telling me is, look, you can only lease out half of your slips. So my commerce has been impacted by some of the rules that they have created. And so if my Land Development Code says I can rent, I can do a lot of things in that marina, but I'm allowed to do rentals, boat rentals, I'm allowed to rent slips to people. And so I'm already under this umbrella. And so when they come, I should only have to provide for every 2 vessels, 1 boat. And I'll tell you that people come 4 hours are gone, 4 hours are gone. And you don't have anybody sitting there going like, well, you had 32 people. They don't have time, really. And I'll be honest with you, no one ever came and checked up on us all summer long. And so when it comes to the fuel, I think that if we talk to the fire marshal and say, look, I just got my whole dock. Every year I'm required to pass an inspection for the fire marshal, and all my fire extinguishers have to be updated. I just paid for all that, right? So if I have that, and they got their fire extinguishers, and we have all these leisure boats that a lot of the times they're not in the livery, but they bring their cans to fill up their boat before they go out to Crab Island on their own. And honestly, you might spill a little bit on the water or, you know, that kind of stuff. So one, I think there's plenty of safety stuff out there already. And I don't know about his dock, but maybe he can be required to have the fire extinguishers like me on his pilings, and that could be sufficient to be on the safe side. So to me, the fueling thing, I don't think it needs to be part of this because we're already under another, you know, the fire marshal has to pass inspections on these marinas. And so I think we're safe. I'm glad that they stopped on the parking temporarily for now. You know, like I said, I just want whenever we make rules and regulations that we find out if we are in conflict with one that already exists for years, right? Were you going to say something?
I was going to ask you a question.
Sure.
So with your marina, how many of them are actually livery vessels that are renting slips versus just Tom, Dick, and Harry taking his boat out for the weekend?
I would say 60-40.
Which way?
60 with livery. Right now I'm empty. All I've got is my leisure.
Right. So what happens when because the weekends are typically very busy.
Extremely.
Where does everybody park?
So I have 2 parking attendants, and so what I did this last summer, so my land development code says both for 38 and 36, if I'm within 400 feet of a municipality, I could, the overflow, not that send everybody over there. So that was just the overflow. But what I did was I hired 2 parking attendants. I quit doing the boatyard business just to appease what the city was asking of me. They didn't want us to park. They didn't want overflows to park over here. I think Crab Shack was always parking over here. And so I hired 2 parking attendants. I didn't do so much boatyard work, which I lost money. And I would park 3 people here, 2 people there, 3 people here, and we just managed to do that. And so
you maintained all the parking on your property?
I maintained, yes. And so I can't say that my people, because we almost wanted to video camera it. It's been funny for the last 2 years what's happening over here. But it's just become a very stressful situation.
Well, and I asked that because like a pontoon boat can carry quite often, 8, 10, 12 people?
Right.
They're not all going in one car.
So some of them come in 2 cars, some of them, you know, some of them rent 2 boats, 3 boats, or whatever. But we managed to handle our people, and like I said, they go like 4 hours, they go to 6 hours, or 8 hours, and it's not always like, boom, they're here, boom, you know. And so,
If I can interject real quick, and,
Yes.
and I mean, if this is a discussion that the LPA wants to have, but right now the parking standards, that's going to be a much later discussion. That's
Okay.
not any part of this right now.
Okay.
It does get very complicated.
Yeah.
The marina versus deliveries, because you're absolutely right. Your typical marina, you know, you don't have 3 cars showing up for
Right.
each and every
One
boat
parking
versus those.
space for
It's
2
something
slips
that we're working
works.
on, trying to
Right.
find a solution
Okay.
into the future for, but that is not anything with what we have in here right now.
Okay.
With what we're
She
working
brought
on.
up parking is the only reason
Understand.
I was asking that question.
yeah, and I brought it up because it was brought up a little, I think somebody had asked about that, and he mentioned it, so I just want to make sure that whatever things that they decide to do, that they just keep in mind, let's always find out what the land development code is before we do ordinances that might be in conflict. But I mainly wanted to come up here and just say that I agree with Kevin that there's a lot of rules and regulations that that should be left to the other agencies. I realize about the safety. The buffers, I can see like a buffer normally is a buffer to separate between residential and commercial in most of the land development codes, and I get that. And I get the fact that we should ask, instead of saying you've got to do this, is ask the neighboring person, hey, do you mind? Because sometimes it's kind of nice to look out there and see, hey, this is really like an island, a tourist place, and you can see all that. But if I was living right next to, you know, people taking trash and beer cans and everything and dumping them right by my house, then I would probably want that buffer. But I don't know that we can make it a requirement, because then, like for instance, if you have 2, and it should not be with the businesses because we are in a commercial area. But if you have like 2 businesses that don't like each other, and that's not me, I mean, I know that there's been a case where two of them didn't like each other, and well, we're gonna put a buffer, and we're just gonna block this off, you know. So I think commercial is a little bit different than if somebody was pulling, you know, all these boats in a residential area. So the buffers, the only thing I wanted to mention, the fueling, which I think, you know, they're going towards hopefully allowing the caddies. I didn't see very many spills. I actually didn't see any spills at all this year. And just that a lot of this stuff was managed by Fish and Wildlife and then DEP, the submerged land leases, and that's about it. Otherwise, I'm hoping that this next year it will be a little bit smoother for us there.
Thank you.
Thank you.
How y'all doing today? I guess. My name's Matt Dorn. I'm at 104 Miracle Strip Parkway, right across the street. My biggest thing is the buffer, because we got the Sea Breeze Inn right next to us. I've been there since 2011, and that hotel has changed hands probably a dozen times. So I would think it would be more the thing of, like she said, talking to the neighbor, and it's two different businesses, you know, not residential, it's a hotel. And if you got basically a new buyer that comes in, and if they do want to put a buffer up, that should be their responsibility. I've been there for, it's gonna be 12 years this year coming up. That's it.
Tim, if that piece gets approved, the buffer piece, anybody who's currently in place, would they be grandfathered in and not have to put a buffer in?
That's a very good question. No, I'm kidding. It ultimately going to depend on city council. So it can be done several ways. When the initial ordinance was put into place about 3 years ago, city council, when they adopted it, they gave a 2-year compliance period. It basically said you have 2 years to come to full compliance with this. Everyone will comply, period. There was no grandfathering, there was no, oh, you've been here for this long. It was, you have 2 years to come to compliance. They could do the same thing. They could come in and say, you've got 1 year to get in compliance, 1 season to get in compliance, or they could come in and say, you know what, we're gonna allow those that are existing right now to continue existing without any of these changes. Ultimately, that's gonna be their decision on there. My guess would be they're probably gonna go similar to what they did before with a compliance period.
So if compliance is the terminology, right? For them to get the approval of the neighbor of, hey, do you want us to put a fence up? And their neighbor's like, no, I'm good, you can just keep it. Is that, would check, compliance?
It would be, depending on how that's written in there. If it's written in there that it's up to the two neighbors, then yeah, it would be in there. If it's written in there, it's not gonna stay the way that it is. But if it's written in there that there has to be that buffer between adjacent properties with those things, then it's gonna be a matter of, hey, you're compliant when you put up the fence or wall.
So Tim, this has actually been part of the ordinance for a while, right?
The buffering has been, the problem with the buffer, like I said, is it said it had to be separated from residential and transient lodging and the livery themselves. What it didn't address is the one situation that we have where there's transient lodging and livery on the same property.
Okay.
So the way it was worded before, they still had to have that buffer between the hotel and the liveries, which just didn't make sense on the same property.
Okay.
So the intent was to change it to just say, if it's a residential or transient lodging on an adjacent property, that's what it was intended to be. It just kind of morphed one too many times.
So this is more for clarification, like this change?
That's correct. But again, we'll bring the recommendations to city council, and if they decide that it should just be ask your neighbor and go with what they want, then that's ultimately their decision on what they want to do with it.
Mm-hmm. So what do we need to do with this?
I was thinking the same thing.
So this was our recommendations then. We're
They
not
are,
really
and so
making any
you could
motions on this.
Make a motion to...
You do need to make a motion to approve of sending the ordinance back to city council with all of your recommendations, all the recommendations from the meeting.
Okay, I make a motion to send all our recommendations to city council.
So who wrote the recommendations down?
I've been keeping track of
That's
it.
what the agendas, or that's what the
There's
minutes
audio.
are for.
Oh, okay.
I'll second.
I've been writing most of them down. Amber will obviously go through and
A little red
you'll
light
probably
up
email
there.
me and be like.
So what was the
did I miss and
motion?
What I missed.
We're just sending our basically everything we just discussed here to city council.
Can I
Okay, so
second?
we're recommending the ordinance with our recommendations.
No, we're just recommending to send it back to city council.
Well, there has to be a recommended approval or denial.
Approve of it with changes.
Oh, approve, I thought it was just sending, I thought we weren't approving this because it's already been to city council.
Well, you have to have a recommend approval or denial.
Okay.
So if you recommend, you could recommend denial unless some of these changes are made. You could recommend approval
Only if,
while presenting these.
Yeah.
It can really be however, but the intent is really just to get, either way, it's gonna go back to city council. It just, whichever one your recommendation is
Okay, I
with
recommend.
the discussion items.
and just to confuse you more, typically this would have gone to you first and then to the city council. But I think through scheduling, they wanted to get it from the city council quicker,
So
so
they
they
can
did
make
them
it
first.
through.
Yeah.
Okay, so then I will make a motion to recommend, to approve this ordinance with our recommendations to city council.
Second.
30.
Okay.
Is that it?
Yep.
Okay.
All right, motion carries 6-0.
Thank you, guys.
Thank you guys for your time.
Thank you for your feedback.
Thank you, seriously, for coming out and speaking.
Thank you, guys.
Thanks, brother. Yeah.
Welcome deliveries. Super fun education. I really just wanted to know about all my business. If you guys are interested,
You're next, sir.
it's going up.
Thanks very much.
Thanks again.
Thank you. Thank you, ma'am.
Thank you very much.
All right, thank you very much for having me, guys. My name is Ashley Sokolsky. I'm a planner one here at the city, and I wanted to do an update on our Tree City USA status. We went ahead and applied, got the application packet in. I wanted to kind of update you or remind you on the Tree City USA recertification process. The Tree City USA is an Arbor Day Foundation certified program that cities can participate in to help with like applying for different grants through like a National Arbor Day situation, but it's also a prerequisite for a lot of the Florida tree grants. So we have identified in growth management that we're looking to do some tree inventory grant applications next year. This is a big requirement for it. Each community has to meet 4 core standards, which is on the back of the handout. This came straight from Tree City, by the way, which is to have a tree border department, which is the LPA. They have to meet at least once a year, which we check off. We have a tree care ordinance. It is in our land development code. We have to maintain a community forestry program with an annual budget of at least $2 per capita. In past years, we've been over 4. This year, we were just under $3 per capita, so we met that requirement. And then the mayor did our Arbor Day proclamation in January. Arbor Day, Florida Arbor Day is in January. Real Arbor Day, or federal Arbor Day is in April with Earth Day. So that's kind of where we stand. Our application was well received. We have one more item that we have to kind of revise a little bit and tweak and send in, and then we will be back in business. So we will do a tree planting in January. But one of the things that we didn't, we can do that is like part of your fun job is if you have any events or see anything going on that you want to replicate, get with Tim and we'll see if we can pull it together and have a fun interactive tree board. Do you have any questions for me before I share?
So you said tree planting was going to start in January. Do we have a master plan of where some of these, where that's going to?
For the purposes of this specific Tree City, we are just required to do an event. And typically in past years, trees get planted with the Arbor Day proclamation. This past year, our work requirement was met because 2 trees were planted at the new Ferry Park, one for Carol Jones, it was an assistant to the city manager, and one for Mayor Mike Anderson that did a lot of the initial Tree City work like in 2004 when it started. So that kind of checked ours off. We've had a request from the police chief that one of the, I think, was she Lieutenant Kinderstalls? I believe so. Her dad, I guess, worked here for a long time, and so she asked if we could plant a tree in honor of him. So we're looking at maybe doing something on the city on the police department property, because we can plant anywhere that the city owns trees, you know. And for like a larger scale tree plan, that can come maybe after we get like a good tree inventory and canopy assessment would be the best use of that money, because there's programs that go on. The state really wants us to do it. We need to do it for FEMA. So should we get a storm or a tornado or a hurricane, we can tell FEMA, hey, we have this tree inventory. These are the trees we lost. And we can ask for money back through that.
Oh.
And then that's when, like, I think a larger scale like that. This is just kind of like one of the prerequisites.
Okay.
Does that answer your question?
Yes, ma'am, it does.
You guys-
Thank you.
you
No,
guys
that's
like
awesome.
trees?
No, that's awesome, thank you.
Do you replant trees? I have some huge pine trees that you could have.
Yeah, so
Don't move much.
Those are not the
to
ones.
talk
We do
to-
actually do a lot of planting in the city,
Yeah.
typically through our rec department and stuff. So we do have, I don't want to get too complicated in it, but with the commercial developments and stuff, there's tree protection requirements, and if they take out protected trees, they either have to mitigate them by planting them back or actually paying into a tree fund. And then we turn that tree fund money around and use it to plant new trees in parks and on the roads and some stuff like that. So the tree being planted all the time.
Yeah, in addition to that tree mitigation fund, the $3 per capita that we calculated that we spend come from our current tree planting. So it can be, so the parks do take down a lot of trees and they plant a lot of trees just kind of organically with their programs, in addition to what we can help with growth management and try to balance out some of the development impacts on our tree canopies.
So when we talk about taking trees out, does that include residential or just commercial properties?
So Florida statute restricts municipalities from regulating tree removal on 1 and 2 family houses. So if you have a single family house or a duplex, you can clear cut the property, and Florida statute protects their right to do so.
Okay, so how about this property that we just rezoned for the acreage, for the
They
three?
cut down
For
some
R2?
trees.
That
They cut down some trees.
It was zoned R1, and it would have allowed them to clear cut it. It's zoned R2 that'll allow them to clear cut it.
Okay,
Well, depending, so
because it's more than 2 properties, it's actually 3, but they're
Well,
looking at
the one-
7.
Well, that's one.
And well, it's 1 right now, you're right. It's
with
one.
the R2, theoretically, if
Yeah,
they were
that's
to go
true.
to, say, like an apartment, like we said, would be a possibility, then they could not clear cut it. It's only for
Okay.
1 and 2 family residential. Now, if they split it into 3 single family lots, well, now those are all single family, and they could clear cut them.
Okay.
But if they keep it as like an apartment, those you cannot just clear cut.
Okay.
There's we have landscape requirements for being planted on the site as well as for the tree protection.
Okay.
The country club one was clear cut for sure.
Yeah.
I drove by that.
Any other questions for me? We can,
We didn't do this last year, did we? I don't remember doing
It's
this
been a
last year.
couple years.
it's been a couple of years, yeah, but we,
I remember
you know,
when
we
I
got,
first
we
started.
were able to bring it back, as a reapplication and recertification. They were happy to have us back, and hopefully we'll be able to get like on their top list of something. They have all kinds of stuff, so.
It used to be
I'm
the only
excited
reason
about
for
it.
the December meeting.
Pardon?
It was usually the only reason for the December meeting was
Here we
this.
are.
I got them all moved to November when I got here. But now we have December meetings anyways.
Yeah.
Thank
So,
you.
so this is gonna be a good kickoff to get back into it, and we'll do something fun for the tree planting, and we'll figure that out here pretty soon, so.
Great.
Any other questions for me? All right, thank you very much.
She's gonna be mad at me, but I asked Ashley to come present it because she did 100% of all the legwork on this stuff to get us back where we needed to be, figuring out all the stuff for these grants. She's done an amazing job with trying to figure out this tree stuff, how we can get these inventories and stuff done. There's a lot of grant money out there, and she has really been working hard to try to make the city better as far as the trees and stuff like that. So I felt it was important for her to come up here and present this one.
Good
You
job.
go, girl.
Good job.
So now she's- Okay.
All right.
next thing was just the presentation at the last LPA. You guys had asked me to come back and kind of give an update on the ICF homes and the flat roofs. I did talk to our building official in the city. He's been here for about 16 years. He said right now there's one existing ICF house in the city. So they have not been prevalent. Obviously the one that we did the variance for recently, they're planning to do that as an ICF build, so that would make the second one that's out there. So again, it's a technology that's there, it's available, it just, for whatever reason, if it's cost or whatever, it just hasn't.
That other one is the one that's only a couple houses away from it, isn't it?
I'm not sure where it's at. He's
It's on Bay Drive, I think.
Yeah, I'm not sure.
There's one in the bar.
What's ICF?
The
Insulated
concrete form. The solid, it's almost like 3D printing kind of thing for a house can be. So they're super reliable, super efficient. Were you here for the variance for the one? Okay. So with the concrete roof they were doing and the ICF forms, I mean, it built to withstand Category 4 hurricanes with zero damage anticipated to it. The structure.
So they were wanting a flat
roof.
roof. And in our land development code, it says you have to have a pitch on the roof.
Yeah. For the flat roof portion of this, he did indicate that there are two existing residential units with flat roofs, and those just simply, during the review process, these reviewers are human and they make errors, and out of all the ones that have gone through, he's aware of two of them that just made it through with the flat roof, that got the permit approved, and then when they built it, obviously we're not gonna come back and be like, oh, just kidding, you gotta go change that stuff. So those were the ones that made it through there. We have discussed it further at the staff level. We're trying to figure out exactly how we wanna word that. We do know we wanna make some changes to that. Obviously it'll come back through the LPA and then on the city council for there. I'm pretty sure a minimum on there, we want to take out the minimum roof pitch. Florida Building Code does allow for a whole variety of them. There's different building materials and building standards depending on if you have certain pitches or the flat roof, but that's all covered in the Florida Building Code. There's no need to kind of restate what is in there, so if we just take it out, I mean, it's obviously an acceptable way. I mean, like the ones that came for the variance, I mean, this is going to be a multi-million-dollar home.
Right.
It's not something that is going to be unappealing, which is my true belief is what this was put in there for, is a goal, block houses with the flat roofs to kind of get away from that appearance.
Well, now, if we take it out, then they don't have to come to us for a variance.
Correct. Also, there's a minimum roof overhang in the code right now as well, that's if we're going to do flat roofs, I mean, you don't necessarily have to have a roof overhang. That doesn't make a lot of sense. So we'll be removing that one as well as the intent. There's a few other ones that we're still looking at, just to make sure that they still make sense in discussing at that level. But we do anticipate those changes coming early next year.
Excellent. All right, board member reports.
Nothing.
No report. Anybody? All right, we are adjourned. Thank you very much.
Happy holidays.